I was unpacking champagne in our Santorini villa when three men in dark suits knocked on our door asking for Gabriel Thatcher, except my husband had just vanished from our anniversary trip, leaving behind a suitcase full of stolen diamonds and a note saying, "Alexandra, run." By sunrise, I discovered I'd been married to one of Interpol's most wanted international thieves, and I wasn't his wife. I was his next target. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh. The weight of Dom Perignon felt heavy in my hands as I arranged it in the silver ice bucket, watching the Santorini sunset paint everything gold and pink. Gabriel had promised the perfect romantic backdrop for our 5th wedding anniversary, and I'd spent the afternoon preparing our private terrace for his return from business calls. The sharp, authoritative knock shattered my romantic anticipation. "Mrs. Thatcher." The voice carried a clipped accent I couldn't place. "We need to speak with you and your husband." I smoothed my white linen dress, assuming Gabriel had arranged some special surprise with the hotel staff, and walked toward the heavy wooden door. Three men in dark suits stood on our private terrace, their formal attire incongruous against the casual Greek island atmosphere. The tallest one, with graying temples and intense blue eyes, held up a leather credential wallet. "Agent Morrison, Interpol," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made my stomach drop. "We're looking for Gabriel Thatcher. Is he here?" The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a cascade of crystal and golden liquid. The sound echoed endlessly in the sudden silence. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "Gabriel manages international telecommunications contracts. He's handling conference calls with different time zones." Agent Morrison exchanged a glance with his colleagues, and something in his expression, pity mixed with professional detachment, made my knees weak. "Ma'am, when did you last see your husband?" "This morning around 9. He should be back for dinner." "We have reservations, Mrs. Thatcher," the agent interrupted gently. "We need you to sit down." I backed toward the white leather sofa, my legs finding the edge as the three men entered without invitation, their eyes scanning the villa with professional thoroughness. "Your husband is Gabriel Henry Cook," Morrison continued, settling across from me. "He's been using the identity Gabriel Thatcher's for approximately 6 years. We've been tracking him across 12 countries for art theft, jewelry heist, and antiquities smuggling." The words hit like physical blows. 6 years. Our entire relationship. Everything. "That's impossible," I whispered, but fragments of memory began reshaping themselves. Gabriel's frequent business trips, his vague work explanations, how he always paid cash, claiming it was easier for international transactions. "Your maiden name is Alexandra Arlington, daughter of tech mogul Richard Arlington," Morrison continued. "We believe you were his next target." One of the other agents approached from the bedroom, holding Gabriel's leather weekend bag. "Sir, you need to see this." Morrison opened the bag on the coffee table between us, and my world tilted completely. Nestled among what I'd assumed were Gabriel's clothes lay several passports with his photo but different names, bundles of cash in various currencies, and a black velvet pouch, diamonds spilled onto the table. Dozens of them, catching the villa's romantic lighting and throwing rainbows across the white surfaces. "These were stolen from a private collection in Monaco 3 weeks ago," Morrison explained clinically. "The theft occurred during what appeared to be a romantic weekend getaway. The victim was a wealthy widow who'd been dating the thief for several months." I stared at the diamonds, understanding creeping through me like ice water. Gabriel at various locations with different women in surveillance photos Morrison showed me. All women who looked happy, trusting in love, all bearing a resemblance to me. He targets successful, affluent women, Morrison continued. He builds long-term relationships, gains their trust, then strikes when they're most vulnerable. My hands shook violently as I processed this. But we've been married for 3 years. Your assets are more complicated, the third agent spoke, consulting a thick file. Your trust fund has specific clauses. Gabriel needed time to understand your wealth and find the best access points. Morrison reached into the bag and withdrew a white envelope with my name in Gabriel's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Alexandra, by the time you read this, you'll know the truth. I never meant for it to go this far. You were supposed to be like the others, a job, nothing more, but you became real to me in a way I didn't expect. I'm sorry for what I've done to your life. I'm sorry for what I was planning to do. Run, change your name, trust no one. Who knew Gabriel Thatcher? The man you married never existed. Something inside me that had been bending under revelation after revelation finally snapped. I wasn't just a wife whose husband had disappeared. I was a target who'd been played for 5 years by a professional criminal planning to destroy me before vanishing. But as I sat surrounded by evidence of Gabriel's deception, watching 3 Interpol agents with professional sympathy, I felt something unexpected rising alongside the devastation, relief. For the first time in 5 years, everything finally made sense. The moment I finished reading Gabriel's note, I knew my real anniversary gift wasn't the champagne or scattered diamonds, it was the truth, and the truth was about to set me free in ways I never could have imagined. Agent Morrison was speaking about protective custody and Gabriel's associates, but his words sounded underwater. I focused on the handwriting, the same careful script that had written "Happy Anniversary, my love" on the card I'd found with breakfast that morning. How many women had received similar notes? How many had sat in luxury hotels, surrounded by the debris of their shattered lives, reading Gabriel's careful explanations of their value as targets? Mrs. Arlington, Morrison's voice cut through my spiral. Can you think of anything Gabriel said about his plans? Any mention of contacts in Greece? Unusual behavior leading up to this trip? I forced myself to concentrate, rewinding through the past week. He was excited about this trip, more than usual. He kept saying it would be life-changing for us. Agent Kellner looked up from his phone. We just got confirmation from Athens. Gabriel Cook boarded a private charter flight to Cyprus 40 minutes ago. Cash payment, fake identification. Cyprus. I didn't know Gabriel knew anyone there. But I was rapidly discovering everything I thought I knew about my husband was fiction. The charter was arranged 3 days ago, Kellner continued. This was planned. He knew we were closing in. Why leave the diamonds? I asked. If he's a thief planning to escape, why leave evidence? Morrison and Kellner exchanged meaningful looks. Because those diamonds aren't the real prize, Morrison said carefully. Mrs. Arlington, 3 days ago, someone using your banking credentials attempted to transfer $2.3 million from your trust fund to an offshore Cayman Islands account. The villa suddenly felt airless. That's impossible. I would have needed multiple forms of verification. The attempt was flagged and stopped, but it used information only you should have accessed. Personal security questions, authorization codes that change monthly. I sank deeper into the sofa, mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider. Gabriel helps me with some financial management, and he has access to my computer, my phone. As they spoke, I remembered moments with horrible new clarity. Gabriel insisting on upgrading our security system, requiring my fingerprints and voice recognition. His patient questions about my father's business, always framed as genuine interest. How he'd encouraged me to digitize important documents for better organization. How long was he planning this? I asked. Morrison consulted his file. based on his pattern, probably from the beginning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Gabriel Cook doesn't do anything without extensive research. He studied you, your routines, relationships, financial structure, everything. I thought about our first meeting at that charity gala, how Gabriel had seemed refreshingly uninterested in my family's wealth, making self-deprecating jokes about his modest telecommunications business, while asking thoughtful questions about my nonprofit work. It hadn't been disinterest, it had been intelligence gathering. What happened to the other women? I asked, suddenly. Morrison hesitated. Most lost significant amounts. Life savings, investment portfolios, family inheritances. One woman in Switzerland lost her entire art collection. Another in Singapore had her identity completely stolen. But they survived. They survived, Morrison confirmed. Financially devastated, emotionally traumatized, but alive. Something in how he said alive chilled my blood. What aren't you telling me? Morrison pulled out his tablet, scrolling to a different file. Emily Remmer, a gallery owner in London. She discovered Gabriel's true identity before he could complete his theft. She confronted him. He paused. She disappeared 3 days later. Her body was found in the Thames 2 weeks after that. Ruled accidental drowning. But the timing, I felt sick. You think Gabriel killed her? We can't prove it, but Emily Remmer knew Gabriel's real name, his methods, his contacts. She was the only victim who could have provided detailed information about his operations. I reread Gabriel's note with new understanding. Run. Change your name. Trust no one who knew Gabriel Thatcher. It wasn't guilt driving his warning. It was self-preservation. I was now the woman who knew too much. Mrs. Arlington, Morrison continued, we need to consider that Gabriel left that note expecting you to disappear voluntarily, to run and hide and never surface as a threat to his operations. The thought sent cold fury through me. Gabriel had taken 5 years of my life, my trust, my love. He'd planned to steal my financial security and leave me devastated. Now he expected me to quietly vanish, so he could continue destroying other women's lives. Standing up, I walked to the terrace overlooking the Aegean Sea. The romantic sunset now looked like the end of one life, and the beginning of something entirely different. Agent Morrison, I said, turning back to face the 3 men watching me with professional concern. I'm not running, and I'm not hiding. I moved back to the table where Gabriel's stolen diamonds caught the light like trapped stars. I'm going to help you catch him. The decision to fight back instead of flee changed everything. But before I could become the hunter instead of the prey, I needed to understand exactly who Alexandra Arlington really was, and who she'd been before Gabriel Cook made her into his perfect mark. Agent Morrison studied me carefully after my declaration, his expression shifting from professional sympathy to something more calculating. Mrs. Arlington, Gabriel Cook is extremely dangerous. He has connections across multiple continents and a proven willingness to eliminate threats. Then you need someone who understands how he thinks, I replied, surprised by my voice's steadiness. Someone who lived with him for 5 years, who saw patterns you might have missed. Morrison glanced at his colleagues. Before we discuss cooperation, I need to understand your background. Gabriel chose you specifically. There had to be reasons beyond just your family's wealth. I settled into the chair facing the scattered evidence of my husband's deception. Where to begin explaining Alexandra Arlington to people who only saw me as a victim? My father, Richard Arlington, built Arlington Technologies from nothing. I started in a garage in 1985 with computer networking systems. By my birth in 1992, the company was worth $50 million. By my Stanford graduation, $2 billion. I paused, remembering the pressure. People assume wealth made my life easy, but it comes with complications. Everyone who approaches you has an agenda. Every friendship, romantic interest, business relationship gets filtered through the question of what they really want. Agent Kellner looked up from his notes. Which would make Gabriel's apparent disinterest in your money particularly appealing. Exactly. Most men either tried too hard to impress me, or were obviously intimidated. Gabriel seemed comfortable, like money didn't matter to him either way. Morrison leaned forward. Tell me about your education and career. Gabriel would have researched everything. I organized thoughts I hadn't articulated in years. Stanford degrees in international business and art history. Business was expected. Dad assumed I'd join the company. Art history was my choice. I loved the detective work in authentication, piecing together provenance, identifying forgeries. The irony hit like a physical blow. I'd spent years learning to identify fake artifacts and histories, and been completely fooled by a fake husband. After college, I worked for Sotheby's 3 years, specializing in contemporary art authentication. I was good at it. Really good. I could spot brushwork inconsistencies, identify forged signatures, trace ownership histories through deliberately obscured records. Morrison's expression sharpened. Gabriel would have known about this expertise. Of course. I talked about it constantly when we first met. I was proud of my work. Heat rose in my cheeks as I remembered Gabriel encouraging those conversations, asking detailed questions about authentication techniques, forgery detection, international art market security vulnerabilities. Why did you leave Sotheby's? Agent Kellner asked. I hesitated. This was the vulnerable part of my story. I uncovered a major forgery operation, a network flooding the market with fake impressionist paintings, museum-quality forgeries, but I noticed provenance documentation inconsistencies. When I investigated deeper, I found connections between several major sales that should have been unrelated. Morrison was fully focused. What happened? I reported everything to my supervisors with detailed documentation. The investigation led to arrests across 3 countries and recovery of over $40 million in stolen or forged artwork. Impressive work, Morrison said, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was also career suicide. The network included powerful people, collectors, dealers, even Sotheby's clients. After the investigation, I found myself effectively blacklisted. Not openly, but suddenly no major auction houses wanted my expertise. Galleries stopped returning calls. The art world can be vindictive when you upset the wrong people. I walked to the window looking at the darkening sea. That's when I met Gabriel. At a charity gala, feeling sorry for myself, wondering if I should just join Dad's company. Gabriel approached me, said he'd read about my forgery network work, that he admired people who chose integrity over convenience. The memory tasted bitter now. Gabriel hadn't admired my integrity. He'd identified it as a threat to be neutralized. He was so supportive during that difficult period. Encouraged me to freelance, build my own authentication consultancy. Said I was too talented to let politics destroy my career. Agent Kellner looked up from his tablet. Did you start the consultancy? I tried. But Gabriel always found reasons I should postpone major projects. A client would be too demanding. Travel requirements would interfere with our relationship. Security risks weren't worth it. He was so reasonable, so concerned for my well-being. Morrison nodded grimly. He was isolating you professionally, making you dependent on him, while mining your knowledge for his operations. Every conversation about authentication techniques, art market security, international shipping and insurance protocols, he was gathering intelligence. Gabriel hadn't just married me for my family's wealth. He'd identified a woman with expertise useful to an international art thief, then systematically undermined my career, while extracting my knowledge. Mrs. Arlington Morrison said carefully. Your authentication skills, are they still sharp? I considered the question. I haven't worked a major case in 3 years. But yes, pattern recognition, document analysis, provenance research, those abilities don't disappear. Good, Morrison said, exchanging looks with his colleagues. Because we're going to need them. The scope of Gabriel's manipulation was clear now. He hadn't just stolen my career and confidence, he'd been preparing to use my professional reputation to legitimize his crimes, while setting me up to take the fall. Where do we start? I asked. Morrison smiled for the first time. We start by figuring out what Gabriel was really planning to steal in Greece. Because those diamonds, they were never the real target. As Morrison spread new documents across the table, I realized that understanding Gabriel's true plan would require me to remember every detail of how our relationship began, and how expertly he'd been playing me from the very first moment we met. I need you to walk us through your relationship with Gabriel from the beginning, Morrison said, arranging photographs carefully. Every detail matters. Where you met, how he approached you, what he said. Gabriel Cook is a professional. Nothing was accidental. I closed my eyes, forcing myself back to that charity gala 5 years ago. The memory felt different now, but I needed to see it clearly. Annual Gala for Children's Educational Foundation, October 15, 2019. I remember because it was exactly 1 year after the Sotheby's investigation destroyed my career. I almost didn't go. Morrison nodded. What made you attend? My father insisted. Said I'd been hiding long enough, that art world politics shouldn't define my future. I paused, remembering my reluctance. The gala was at the Metropolitan Museum, raising money for art education programs. Agent Kellner looked up. Perfect cover for someone researching art market vulnerabilities. I didn't think of it that way. I was standing alone near the Egyptian wing, considering leaving early, when this man approached. Confident but not aggressive. Well-dressed but not flashy. He said, "You look like someone who actually understands what we're looking at." I could still picture Gabriel that night. Dark hair slightly tousled, genuine smile, expensive but understated watch suggesting success without ostentation. What was your first impression? Morrison asked. That he was different. Most men at those events either ignored me or came on too strong. Gabriel seemed genuinely interested in conversation, not conquest. He made an insightful observation about the museum's Egyptian collection. Morrison leaned forward. What kind of observation? I recalled Gabriel's exact words. He noticed several pieces had been recently repositioned, wondering aloud whether it was aesthetic or security concerns. He said museums often rearrange valuable pieces after attempted thefts, trying to make it look like curatorial choices. The agents exchanged meaningful glances. Kellner made a note. Very specific knowledge for a telecommunications consultant, Morrison observed. I thought it showed intellectual curiosity. We talked for over an hour about art, authentication, auction world politics. Gabriel listened so carefully, asked such thoughtful questions. I moved to the terrace, needing space as memories reshaped themselves. He knew about the forgery investigation. Not details, but he'd read about it in art press. Said he admired whistleblowers. People who chose to do right despite professional costs. Morrison's voice was gentle, but probing. How did he know you were involved? It wasn't widely publicized. I thought back. He said he'd seen my name in a small ART News article about the investigation's impact on authentication standards. I turned back. But now I'm wondering if he'd researched me beforehand. Almost certainly, Morrison confirmed. Tell me about your second meeting. 3 days later, he called asking for dinner somewhere quiet where we could actually talk. Small Italian place in the village. Nothing fancy, nothing meant to impress. We discussed everything except money or business success. Agent Kellner looked up. What did you talk about? Books, travel, philosophy. My art authentication work. Gabriel had this way of asking questions that made me want to explain everything in detail. He was fascinated by provenance research detective work, how you trace a painting's ownership through centuries. I realized with growing horror how much I'd volunteered that first week. I told him about forged document identification techniques, how criminal networks moved stolen art through legitimate auction houses, security vulnerabilities in international shipping. My voice got smaller. I thought I was sharing passion with someone who appreciated it. Morrison nodded grimly. He was conducting a master class in art theft with you as his unwitting professor. Over the following weeks, Gabriel became increasingly important to me. He was rebuilding my confidence after professional disaster, making me feel valued again. He suggested I write a book about authentication techniques, said my expertise was too valuable to waste. Did you write it? Kellner asked. I started it. Gabriel encouraged detailed case studies, examples of how I'd identified forgeries and traced stolen pieces. Said it would help other authenticators, make the art world more secure. I laughed bitterly. I showed him every chapter. He gave such helpful feedback. Morrison pulled out his tablet, showing me a photograph of Gabriel at what appeared to be an upscale gallery opening. His hair was lighter, clothing more casual, standing next to a woman with short blonde hair who looked nervous and smitten. Is this the man you knew as Gabriel Thatcher? That's him, but the hair's wrong. I don't recognize the woman. Taken in Zurich 8 months before he met you. The woman is Camille Rosberg, daughter of a Swiss banking family. She disappeared with 2 million in family funds 6 weeks after this photo. I stared at Gabriel's familiar smile directed at another woman, with the same expression he'd once used on me. Morrison scrolled through more photos. Gabriel at various social events, always impeccably dressed, always with different women who looked happy, trusting, completely unaware. The pattern's always the same, Morrison continued. He researches targets extensively, approaches them at vulnerable moments, offers exactly what they need emotionally, then extracts value before disappearing. What made you different was duration, Kellner added. 5 years is the longest documented. Most cons lasted 6 months to 2 years maximum. Why did he stay with me so long? Morrison consulted his file. Because you offered something unique, ongoing access to high-level authentication expertise, combined with significant financial resources. You weren't just a one-time score. You were an asset he could continue exploiting. I thought about our engagement, wedding, Gabriel's seeming happiness during our early years. Had any of it been real? Morrison's expression was kind but firm. Mrs. Arlington, everything Gabriel did was calculated. The timing, location, words, all designed to make you feel special, chosen, loved. It's what he does. I felt the full weight of 5 years of systematic manipulation. But alongside devastation, something else was growing, a cold analytical part of my mind that Gabriel had actually strengthened through his encouragement of my work. Agent Morrison, I said, looking up with new determination, if Gabriel spent 5 years learning from me, then I spent 5 years learning from him. I know his patterns, methods, preferences. I know how he thinks. Morrison smiled. That's exactly what we're counting on. But before I could use that knowledge against him, I needed to confront the painful truth about all the warning signs I'd ignored, and the people who'd tried to save me from Gabriel's web, before it was too late. We need to discuss people who expressed concerns about Gabriel, Morrison said, pulling out another file. Friends, family, colleagues. Gabriel would have identified these threats early and worked to neutralize them. I felt my stomach clench as faces flashed through my mind. People I'd defended Gabriel to, people I'd distanced myself from. My father, I said immediately. He never liked Gabriel from the beginning. Morrison nodded encouragingly. What were his specific concerns? Dad said Gabriel's background was too vague. He had security run a basic check, but Gabriel's credentials seemed legitimate. Still, Dad kept insisting something felt rehearsed about Gabriel. His stories were too polished, responses too perfect. I remembered the fight we'd had, how I'd accused my father of being unable to accept that someone could love me for myself. How Gabriel had been so understanding about the family tension. Gabriel used my father's opposition to strengthen our bond, I realized. He positioned it as us against the world, made defending him feel romantic. Morrison made a note, classic isolation technique. Who else? My best friend from college, Cleo Remmer. The name came out barely audible. I hadn't spoken to Cleo in over 2 years. She visited 6 months after Gabriel and I started dating. Pulled me aside the last night, saying Gabriel made her uncomfortable. Agent Kellner leaned forward. How? She said he asked too many personal questions about my family's business, my routines. But he did it so smoothly, woven into normal conversation, she felt like she was being interviewed without realizing it. I remembered how defensive I'd become, how I'd accused Cleo of being unable to handle my happiness. Gabriel had suggested maybe Cleo was threatened by our relationship because she was single. I chose Gabriel over Cleo, I admitted, shame burning in my chest. When she kept expressing doubts, I started seeing her less. Eventually we stopped talking. Morrison nodded grimly. Gabriel would have seen her as a significant threat. There were others. My colleague from Sotheby's, Emily Thatcher, she ran into us at a gallery opening about a year into our relationship. Called me the next day saying something wasn't right. Gabriel had demonstrated too much knowledge about museum security systems during casual conversation. The memory made me feel sick. Emily had been trying to protect me, using her professional expertise to identify a threat I couldn't see. Gabriel suggested we avoid Emily after that. Said she seemed troubled, possibly jealous. Made it sound like kindness when he suggested we not put her in uncomfortable situations. Morrison's expression was sympathetic but firm. Gabriel systematically removed everyone who might have exposed him. What about your family's security personnel? I thought of Marcus, our longtime security chief. Marcus never said anything directly, but I caught him watching Gabriel sometimes. Studying him. Gabriel always seemed slightly tense around Marcus. Morrison made another note. We'll want to speak with Marcus. I felt the weight of all those missed warnings, all those people who tried to protect me. Gabriel had been skillful, patient, but the signs had been there. The questions, I said suddenly. Gabriel was always asking questions about everything. My childhood, my family's routines, my father's business, my work processes. I thought it showed interest. Morrison nodded. Intelligence gathering disguised as intimacy. Gabriel's signature move. As Morrison continued planning, I realized that tomorrow I would use everything Gabriel had taught me about deception to help bring him down. For 5 years he'd been studying me, but he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd taught me to think like him. But understanding Gabriel's Greek operation would require me to remember every detail of how this anniversary trip had been planned, and realize that what I'd thought was romantic spontaneity had actually been months of careful criminal preparation. Morrison spread a map of Santorini across the table, marking locations with red pins. Walk me through how this trip was planned. When Gabriel suggested it, how he chose the location, what activities he proposed. I stared at the map, seeing the island differently now. What had seemed like paradise this morning looked like a carefully chosen crime scene. Gabriel brought up the idea about 4 months ago, I began. We were having dinner at home, and he said he wanted something truly memorable for our 5th anniversary. Something that would mark a new chapter in our lives. Agent Kellner looked up. Did he suggest Santorini immediately? No. At first he mentioned several possibilities. Tuscany, French Riviera, maybe Morocco. He wanted somewhere romantic but not touristy, somewhere we could have privacy and authentic experiences. Morrison pointed to the map. How did Santorini come up specifically? Gabriel said he'd been researching Greek islands for a telecommunications client, upgrading internet infrastructure for luxury resorts. He'd learned about Santorini's quieter areas, places where we could avoid crowds. The lie tasted bitter now. There had never been any telecommunications client. He was particularly excited about the history. Gabriel said Santorini had incredible archaeological sites, ancient artifacts most tourists never saw. He wanted to arrange private tours of excavation sites, maybe meet with local archaeologists. Morrison and Kellner exchanged meaningful glances. Did Gabriel know specific details about Santorini's archaeological community? Morrison asked carefully. Yes. He mentioned Dr. Nikos Papadakis, a local archaeologist who supposedly specialized in Minoan artifacts. Gabriel said he'd contacted Dr. Papadakis about arranging private tours of restricted sites. Agent Kellner typed rapidly on his tablet. After a moment, he looked up grimly. There is no Dr. Nikos Papadakis associated with any archaeological institution in Greece. But there was a major theft from a private collection of Minoan artifacts in Athens 3 weeks ago. Pieces worth over €2 million. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Gabriel hadn't been planning a romantic getaway. He'd been setting up his next heist. The villa, I said suddenly. Gabriel insisted on this specific villa. Perfect isolation for privacy but close to archaeological sites for cultural excursions. Morrison pointed to our location. This villa is also positioned for quick escape routes. Private beach below could accommodate a small boat. The road connects to the main highway within minutes. Gabriel handled all arrangements, flights, villa rental, car service. He said he wanted to surprise me with perfect planning. Agent Kellner looked up again. The villa wasn't booked under Gabriel Thatcher's name. It was reserved by Henry Cook. His real middle name, I whispered. Even his fake identity used pieces of his real one. Morrison consulted his file. The booking was made with a credit card tracing to a shell company in Cyprus, the same company that received the attempted transfer from your trust fund. Everything Gabriel had told me about this trip had been lies, but they'd been so carefully constructed, so detailed. He'd shown me confirmation emails, travel itineraries, research about local restaurants and cultural sites. The timeline, I said. Gabriel suggested this specific week, because the weather would be perfect and there would be fewer tourists. Morrison nodded grimly. This week coincides with a major archaeological conference in Athens. Most legitimate researchers and security personnel would be occupied there. Gabriel had been preparing for months. Every conversation about the trip, every detail he'd shared, it was all intelligence gathering and operational planning. Gabriel was planning to use your authentication expertise to identify high-value targets. Agent Kellner said. Your presence would provide perfect cover. A wealthy couple on cultural holiday, with the wife being a legitimate art expert. I felt sick thinking about how Gabriel had planned to use my professional reputation to facilitate his crimes. Agent Morrison, I said. Gabriel left those diamonds deliberately, didn't he? This wasn't panic, it was part of his plan. Morrison smiled grimly. What do you think? I considered everything I'd learned about Gabriel's methods. He left them as a distraction, something to occupy Interpol while he completed his real objective. Morrison nodded approvingly. Very good. Now tell me, if you were Gabriel Cook with your wife's authentication expertise and years of planning, what would your real target be? As I stared at that map of Santorini, understanding Gabriel's true plan, I realized that the man I'd trusted with my life had been setting up the crime of the century, and I was supposed to be his perfect accomplice. I studied the map with new eyes, applying everything I knew about Gabriel's methods and my own expertise. The red pins Morrison had placed suddenly formed a pattern that made my blood run cold. The National Archaeological Museum of Thera, I said slowly, pointing to a location near the capital. Gabriel mentioned it specifically. He said they had pieces not on public display, items from recent excavations that only serious scholars were permitted to view. Morrison leaned forward intently. What else did he say? Gabriel said he'd researched the museum's collection extensively. He knew they'd acquired several new Minoan pieces in the past year, items that hadn't been fully catalogued yet, pieces still being authenticated. My voice grew quieter. He said it would be fascinating to see artifacts the public hadn't heard of yet. Agent Kellner was typing rapidly. The museum's security protocols for uncatalogued pieces would be less comprehensive than for their permanent collection. Exactly. And Gabriel had been asking me detailed questions about how new acquisitions are processed, authentication timelines, documentation requirements, security measures during evaluation periods. Morrison pulled out his tablet, showing me a photograph of an ornate ceremonial dagger with intricate gold inlay work. Is this the type of piece Gabriel was interested in? I stared at the image, my trained eye automatically analyzing the craftsmanship. It was exquisite, worth millions to the right collector. This is Minoan, probably 1500 BCE. The goldwork is exceptional, preservation remarkable. I stopped as understanding hit. This is from the Athens theft, isn't it? Morrison nodded. This dagger, and 3 matching ceremonial cups were stolen 3 weeks ago. We believe they're here on Santorini waiting to be moved. Agent Kellner looked up. Mrs. Arlington, we think Gabriel wasn't planning to steal from the museum at all. We think he was planning to use your reputation to authenticate stolen pieces before selling them. The scope became horrifyingly clear. Gabriel hadn't just been setting up a theft. He'd been preparing to turn me into an unwitting accomplice in massive money laundering. My authentication would have made the pieces infinitely more valuable, I said, feeling sick. A certification from Alexandra Arlington carries significant weight. Gabriel could have tripled the selling price. Morrison consulted his notes. The stolen pieces are worth approximately 2 million euros on the black market. With your authentication, they could sell for 6 to 8 million to private collectors. Morrison showed me another photograph, a man in his 60s with silver hair and expensive clothing. Do you recognize this person? I studied the image. He looks familiar, but I can't place where. Viktor Petrov, wealthy Russian businessman, with a passion for ancient artifacts and a reputation for not asking inconvenient questions about provenance. Intelligence suggests he was supposed to arrive in Santorini tomorrow. Gabriel had probably planned for me to spend the morning authenticating stolen artifacts while believing I was helping local archaeologists. Gabriel would have told me Petrov was a potential consulting client, I realized. Someone building a legitimate collection who needed expert authentication. I would have been happy to help. Morrison's expression was grave. If Gabriel's plan had succeeded, you would have been legally complicit in stolen artifact sales. Your reputation would have been destroyed, and you could have faced serious criminal charges. Gabriel hadn't just been planning to steal from me, he'd been setting me up to take the fall for his crimes. The diamonds, I said suddenly. Gabriel left them as evidence against me, didn't he? If something went wrong, the stolen diamonds in our villa would make me look guilty. Morrison nodded approvingly. Gabriel always plans exit strategies carefully. He could have claimed you were the mastermind. Agent Morrison, I said, Gabriel's not in Cyprus, is he? Morrison exchanged glances with his colleagues. What makes you say that? I looked at the map again, seeing the pattern clearly. The private beach below our villa, the boat access, the timing of Viktor Petrov's arrival. Gabriel's not running, he's still here, waiting to complete the sale. Morrison smiled grimly. We think you're right. Somewhere on this island, Gabriel's sitting with millions in stolen artifacts, waiting for his buyer. I stood and walked to the terrace, looking out at the dark water. Somewhere out there, Gabriel was probably congratulating himself on how perfectly his plan was unfolding. He was wrong. Agent Morrison, I said, turning back with new determination. I want to help you catch him. Not just for what he did to me, but for what he was planning to do. Morrison nodded. Then we're going to need you to do something very dangerous. We're going to need you to help us set a trap. The plan Morrison outlined was risky, requiring me to become bait in a game where Gabriel held all the advantages. But as I listened to the details, I realized that for the first time in 5 years, I finally had something Gabriel didn't expect, the truth. Gabriel believes he's in complete control. Morrison began, spreading additional documents. He thinks you're either hiding in fear, or you've fled the island. He has no idea. Interpol has made contact, which gives us significant tactical advantage. I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly. The full realization was hitting me. I was about to participate in capturing a dangerous international criminal who'd been planning my destruction for years. What exactly do you need me to do? I asked. Agent Kellner pulled up a new file. Tomorrow morning, Viktor Petrov is scheduled to arrive at a private marina. Gabriel will want to complete authentication and sail quickly. We think he'll contact you. Morrison leaned forward. Gabriel's note told you to run, but he knows you well enough to predict you might not follow instructions immediately. He'll count on your curiosity, your need to understand. He might reach out to gauge your state of mind, or manipulate you into staying quiet. The psychology made sense. Gabriel had built a psychological profile of me over 5 years. He knew I was analytical, needed to understand situations completely before making decisions. When Gabriel reaches out, and we're confident he will, you'll need to seem confused and frightened, but not completely panicked. Kellner said, he needs to believe you haven't figured out the full scope of his operations. Morrison added, Gabriel will probably try to convince you that leaving those diamonds was a mistake, that Interpol's presence is coincidental. He'll want to calm your fears, and potentially suggest you return home quietly while he handles the situation. Gabriel had invested too much time in me to simply abandon the asset I represented. Even if his primary plan was disrupted, he'd want to minimize damage and maintain control over my actions. But I need to be careful, I said. If I seem too calm or knowledgeable, he'll realize I've been talking to law enforcement. Exactly. You'll perform the role of confused, betrayed wife who's more hurt than suspicious. Agent Kellner pulled up a map showing communication towers. We'll have your phone monitored and location tracked at all times. Gabriel won't make contact without us knowing immediately. I stared at the technical setup, feeling overwhelmed. What if Gabriel doesn't contact me? What if he decides I'm too much of a risk? Morrison was serious. Based on everything we know about Gabriel's psychology and his investment in your relationship, we believe he'll reach out. You represent 5 years of work and millions in potential value. He won't abandon that easily. The clinical way they discussed Gabriel's calculations about my worth was both reassuring and deeply disturbing. There's something else, Morrison continued gravely. If Gabriel makes contact, he might arrange a meeting. This is where the operation becomes truly dangerous. Agent Kellner looked up. Gabriel Cook has killed before. If he feels cornered or suspects you're working with law enforcement, he won't hesitate to eliminate the threat. I thought about Emily Remmer. Gabriel was capable of murder when his operations were threatened. But that's also our opportunity, Morrison said. If Gabriel arranges to meet with you, we can position teams to capture him. The key is making him feel confident and in control until we spring the trap. I walked to the window, looking at the peaceful landscape that had become the backdrop for international crime. Somewhere out there, Gabriel was planning his next move. Agent Morrison, I said, there's something you need to understand about Gabriel. He doesn't just plan for success, he plans for failure. If he contacts me, if he arranges a meeting, he'll have multiple escape routes and contingency plans. Morrison nodded approvingly. That's exactly the insight we need. I considered everything I'd observed about Gabriel over 5 years. Gabriel never commits to anything without exit strategies. Even simple dinner reservations. He always chose restaurants with multiple entrances, always parked where he could leave quickly. As the agents continued planning, I felt strange clarity settling over me. For 5 years, Gabriel had been studying me, learning my patterns, predicting my responses. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd taught me to think like him. Now I was going to use that knowledge to help destroy him. As the night wore on and Morrison's team finalized their plans, I found myself processing, not just Gabriel's betrayal, but the systematic way he'd reshaped my entire understanding of reality. Everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and partnership had been carefully constructed lies. The agents had left me alone briefly while they coordinated with headquarters. I sat on the terrace in darkness, staring at distant boats moving across black water. Each point of light could be Gabriel, I realized. Any vessel could be carrying stolen artifacts, criminal associates, or escape routes I couldn't imagine. I thought about our wedding day 3 years ago. Gabriel had seemed genuinely emotional during our vows, actual tears when I walked down the aisle that I'd interpreted as overwhelming love. Now I wondered if those tears had been relief that his longest con was finally secured with legal documentation. The memory felt poisoned, but examining it closely, I started seeing things I'd missed. Gabriel's insistence on a small, private ceremony. His suggestion that we not invite my business colleagues. His preference for a destination wedding in Tuscany, far from anyone who knew me professionally. He was isolating me even then, I whispered. My phone sat silent on the table, fitted with Agent Kellner's monitoring equipment. Gabriel hadn't made contact yet, but Morrison seemed confident he would. I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember other moments with new understanding. Our first anniversary trip to Switzerland, which I now realized coincided with a major art theft in Zurich, involving Camille Rosberg. Our second anniversary in Monaco, weeks before the casino heist that made headlines. Our third anniversary in Singapore, where Gabriel had been particularly interested in visiting private galleries. Every romantic gesture, every thoughtful surprise, every moment that made me feel special, all operational planning disguised as devotion. Morrison approached with coffee. The local authorities have been cooperative. We'll have surveillance teams positioned around the island by dawn. I accepted the coffee gratefully. Agent Morrison, can I ask you something? In your experience with cases like this, do you think any of it was real? The emotions, the connection. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. I've been hunting international criminals for 15 years. People like Gabriel are skilled at mimicking genuine emotion. But Gabriel stayed with you for 5 years. That's unprecedented in his known history. Something about your relationship was different. You think he actually cared about me? I think Gabriel found himself in an unexpected situation. He approached you as a mark, but you became more complex. You had value beyond financial assets, expertise he could exploit, connections he could leverage, credibility he could use for years. Morrison turned to look at me directly. That doesn't mean he loved you, but it might mean you became more important than he planned, which could make him more dangerous now, or more predictable. The possibility that Gabriel had developed genuine feelings was somehow more disturbing than pure deception. Complicated emotions mixed with criminal manipulation created a psychological maze I wasn't sure I wanted to navigate. There's something else I've been thinking about, I said. Gabriel's note, the warning to run, change my name, trust no one. If he was just protecting his operation, why warn me at all? Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Gabriel could have simply disappeared without explanation. The fact that he left a warning suggests he was either covering his tracks by seeming to care about your welfare, maintaining psychological hold over you, genuinely trying to protect you from something he knew was coming, or setting up his next manipulation. Or he was setting up his next manipulation, making me grateful for his protections, so I'd be more susceptible to future contact. Morrison smiled approvingly. Very good, you're learning to think like an investigator instead of a victim. Agent Kellner emerged with his tablet. We've identified Viktor Petrov's yacht, currently anchored about 12 nautical miles northeast. He'll likely approach tomorrow morning as scheduled. I felt my stomach tighten. Tomorrow everything would come to a head. As I sat in darkness listening to waves against rocks below, I thought about how for 5 years Gabriel had been collecting information about me while I'd also been learning about him. He'd revealed his own methods, psychology, weaknesses. The student was about to become the teacher. My phone buzzed suddenly, sharp in the quiet night air. All 3 of us froze. Morrison nodded to Kellner, who activated monitoring equipment. It's him, I said, recognizing the number. My heart pounded as I reached for the phone. Gabriel was making contact. As I stared at Gabriel's name on my phone screen, 5 years of shared history compressed into a single moment of choice. I could answer and step into Interpol's trap, or let it ring and wonder forever what Gabriel would have said to the woman he'd planned to destroy. Morrison nodded encouragingly. Agent Kellner had monitoring equipment active, ready to trace and record. My finger hovered over the answer button. Remember, Morrison whispered, confused and hurt, but not suspicious. You're the betrayed wife, not the informed witness. I took a deep breath and answered. Gabriel. My voice came out exactly as it should, shaky, uncertain, desperate for explanations. Alexandra. His voice was the same as always, warm and familiar, with that slight catch that had always made me feel like the most important person in his world. Thank God you answered. Are you all right? The concern was so perfectly calibrated that for a split second I almost forgot everything I'd learned about him. Am I all right? I let genuine emotion creep in, though not the emotion he expected. Gabriel, there were men here, government agents. They said terrible things about you. A pause. I could almost hear Gabriel calculating, deciding how much to admit. I know, he said finally. That's why I had to leave. I couldn't let them find me there with you. It would have put you in danger. Morrison was taking notes, gesturing for me to keep Gabriel talking. I don't understand, I said, injecting confusion into my voice. They showed me photographs, documents. They said you weren't who you claimed to be. Another pause, longer. Alexandra, I need you to listen carefully. Those men aren't what they seem. There are people who want to hurt me, who want to destroy everything we've built together. I've been trying to protect you from this for years. The audacity was breathtaking. Even with his cover blown, Gabriel was trying to position himself as my protector. Protect me from what? From my past, Gabriel said, wounded tone engaged. Before I met you, I was involved with dangerous people. Business partners who turned out to be criminals. When I discovered what they were doing, I tried to get out, but they threatened me. Threatened us. Agent Kellner was shaking his head in amazement at Gabriel's creativity. Gabriel, they had evidence, bank records, photographs of you with other women. They said you're wanted by Interpol for art theft. Silence stretched. I could hear Gabriel breathing, recalibrating his approach. Those photographs are fake, he said finally. And the other women, Alexandra, I've never told you about the work I do for the government. Undercover operations, tracking international criminals. Everything those agents showed you is part of my cover identity. I had to admire his audacity. Gabriel was claiming to be an undercover agent pursuing the very criminals he actually was. You work for the government. I made my voice small, hopeful. I can't give details over the phone, but yes, for 8 years I've been infiltrating art theft networks. The telecommunications business is my cover. Everything I've done, including marrying you, has been to maintain that cover. Morrison's eyebrows shot up. Gabriel had just admitted our entire marriage was operational, including marrying me. I let hurt bleed into my voice. No, his response was immediate, passionate. Alexandra, falling in love with you was never part of the plan. You were supposed to be part of my cover, but you became everything to me. Morrison was making circular motions, encouraging me to continue. The diamonds, I said suddenly. Gabriel, there were stolen diamonds in your suitcase. Another long pause. Evidence. I was supposed to deliver them to my handlers, but when Interpol showed up, I had to leave them behind. I looked at Morrison, who was making a wrap-it-up gesture. Gabriel, I said, letting my voice break. I don't know what to believe. I'm scared. These agents want me to help them catch you. Never, Gabriel said fiercely. Alexandra, I would never hurt you, but I need you to get away from those agents. They're using you to get to me. Morrison nodded approvingly. Gabriel was getting to his real purpose. Where should I go? There's a small church on the north side of the island, Gabriel said. Agios Minas, near the old lighthouse. Meet me there tomorrow morning at sunrise. I'll explain everything then. Morrison was writing furiously, passing notes to Kellner. They had their location. I love you, Gabriel said, and for a terrifying moment, I almost believed him. I love you too, I whispered, and ended the call. Morrison was already coordinating surveillance teams, but I sat in darkness, staring at my phone, wondering if somewhere beneath all the lies, Gabriel Cook actually believed his own story about loving me. And wondering why, despite everything I knew, part of me still wanted to believe it too. As Morrison's team prepared for tomorrow's confrontation, I realized that facing Gabriel again would require me to become someone I'd never been before. Not the trusting wife, not the confused victim, but the woman who had learned to see through a master manipulator's most powerful weapon, the illusion of love. The villa had become a command center. Agent Kellner was coordinating with surveillance teams, positioned around the island, while Morrison reviewed tactical plans for tomorrow's operation at Agios Minas Church. But despite all the activity, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was dealing with. Mrs. Arlington, Morrison said, approaching where I stood on the terrace. I want you to understand that tomorrow will be psychologically challenging in ways you might not expect. Gabriel will use every emotional manipulation technique he knows to try to regain control over you." I nodded, watching the first hints of dawn beginning to lighten the eastern horizon. "Agent Morrison, I've been thinking about something Gabriel said during the call. He claimed that falling in love with me wasn't part of his plan." Morrison sat down in the chair beside me. "What do you think about that claim?" I considered the question carefully. Over the past hours, as I'd processed everything I'd learned about Gabriel, a strange transformation had been taking place inside me. The grief and betrayal were still there, but they were being joined by something unexpected: clarity. "I think Gabriel believes it," I said finally. "Which might actually make him more dangerous. A criminal who knows he's lying is one thing. A criminal who's convinced himself his lies are truth is something else entirely." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's very insightful. In our experience, long-term con artists often develop genuine feelings for their marks, especially when the relationship extends over years. But those feelings don't change the fundamental nature of the relationship. They just make the manipulation more complex." I thought about the moments in our marriage that had felt most genuine. Quiet mornings over coffee, Gabriel's support during my father's heart surgery last year, the way he'd held me when I'd cried over my failed consulting business. Had those moments been real for him, even while everything else was calculated deception? "Does it matter," I asked, "whether Gabriel's feelings were genuine or not? He still planned to destroy my life." "It matters for tomorrow," Morrison replied. "If Gabriel has genuine feelings for you, he'll be more desperate to make you believe him. He'll take greater risks, make more emotional appeals. That desperation could work in our favor, but it also makes him unpredictable." Agent Kellner joined us on the terrace, tablet in hand. "Mrs. Arlington, we've been analyzing Gabriel's call patterns and movement around the island. He's been very careful, but we think we've identified his base of operations." He showed me satellite images of a small compound on the northern coast. Private villa, isolated location, multiple escape routes including boat access. The property was rented 3 weeks ago by a shell company registered in Cyprus. 3 weeks ago, Gabriel had been planning this operation since before he'd even suggested our anniversary trip. Every romantic detail, every thoughtful gesture of the past month had been operational preparation. "What about Viktor Petrov?" I asked. Morrison consulted his notes. "His yacht maintains position offshore. Our contacts in maritime surveillance report that a smaller boat has been making runs between Petrov's yacht and various points along Santorini's coast. We believe Gabriel has been transporting the stolen artifacts for authentication and sale." I felt a cold fury settle in my chest as I fully understood how close Gabriel had come to succeeding. If Interpol hadn't caught up with him, I would have spent today unknowingly authenticating stolen artifacts, providing the legitimacy Gabriel needed to sell them for millions of dollars. "Agent Morrison," I said, "Gabriel mentioned proof that he works for the government. He's planning to show me documents tomorrow." "Forged credentials, most likely," Morrison replied. "Gabriel is skilled at document forgery. It's part of how he maintains his various identities. He'll have prepared convincing evidence of his supposed undercover work." Agent Kellner looked up from his tablet. "Mrs. Arlington, there's something else. Gabriel's call originated from a location very close to the church where he wants to meet you. He's been staying nearby, which means he's had time to prepare the site, set up escape routes, possibly even position backup support." The tactical implications were clear. Gabriel wasn't just meeting me for an emotional conversation. He was orchestrating a carefully planned operation where he held every advantage. "Which is why," Morrison continued, We need to discuss your safety protocols for tomorrow. Gabriel Cook has killed before. If he feels cornered, if he realizes you're working with us, he won't hesitate to eliminate the threat you represent. I thought about Emily Remmer, the gallery owner whose body was found in the Thames. She'd discovered Gabriel's true identity and tried to expose him. Now I was in the same position, but with one crucial difference: I had Interpol's protection. Agent Morrison, I said, I want to do this, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because I need to face him. I need to show myself that I can see through his manipulation now. Morrison studied my face carefully. Mrs. Arlington, this isn't about proving anything to yourself. This is a law enforcement operation with very real dangers. I understand that, I replied. But for 5 years, Gabriel made me doubt my own judgment, my own perceptions. He convinced me that my professional instincts were wrong, that my friends' concerns were jealousy, that my father's warnings were overprotectiveness. Tomorrow, I get to trust my own judgment again. Agent Kellner was monitoring communications traffic. Mrs. Arlington, we'll have teams positioned around the church, but Gabriel will be watching for surveillance. You'll be essentially on your own during the initial contact. I felt my stomach tighten, but my resolve remained steady. What exactly do you need me to do? Morrison pulled out a small device, no larger than a button. This is a tracking beacon with audio transmission capability. It's virtually undetectable, but it will allow us to monitor your conversation and track your location if Gabriel tries to move you. He handed me a second device, this one resembling an ordinary phone charger. Emergency signal. If you feel you're in immediate danger, activate this and our teams will move in immediately. As I examined the equipment, I realized how completely my life had changed in the span of 12 hours. This morning I'd been a wife preparing for a romantic anniversary celebration. Tonight I was a federal informant preparing to help capture an international criminal. But underneath the fear and adrenaline, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The excitement of using my analytical skills for something important. For 5 years, Gabriel had suppressed my professional confidence, made me doubt my abilities, convinced me that my expertise wasn't valuable. Tomorrow, I would use everything he'd taught me about deception to help bring him down. Agent Morrison, I said, looking up from the equipment, there's one more thing Gabriel doesn't know about me, something that might give us an advantage. Morrison raised an eyebrow. What's that? I smiled for the first time since this ordeal began. I've always been better at reading people than I gave myself credit for. Gabriel spent 5 years teaching me to doubt my instincts, but my instincts were right about him from the beginning. I just chose to ignore them. Morrison nodded slowly. And tomorrow, I listen to my instincts, and my instincts tell me that Gabriel Cook is about to make the biggest mistake of his criminal career. As the sun began to rise over Santorini, I prepared for the performance of my life. Gabriel thought he knew Alexandra Arlington, the naive, trusting woman he'd molded over 5 years. He was about to meet someone entirely different. I stood before the bathroom mirror in our villa, applying makeup with deliberate precision. Every detail mattered now. Gabriel would be studying my appearance for signs of stress, suspicion, or deception. I needed to look like the confused, frightened wife he expected to see. But as I worked, I caught my own eyes in the reflection and saw something that surprised me. There was steel there now, a hardness that hadn't existed 24 hours ago. Gabriel had spent years systematically undermining my confidence, convincing me to doubt my professional instincts, isolating me from people who might have protected me. In trying to create the perfect victim, he'd accidentally forged something much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. The tracking device Morrison had given me was virtually invisible, disguised as a small decorative button on my jacket. The emergency beacon was concealed in what appeared to be an ordinary phone case. Technology that would have seemed like science fiction to me yesterday now felt like essential tools for survival. Mrs. Arlington. Agent Kellner called from the main room. We're ready to begin final positioning. I took one last look at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked vulnerable, shaken, exactly what Gabriel would expect. But beneath the carefully constructed appearance, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete certainty about who I was and what I needed to do. I joined Morrison and Kellner in the living room, where they were monitoring communications from surveillance teams positioned around the island. Gabriel left his base approximately 20 minutes ago, Morrison reported. Small boat heading toward the church's coastal access point. He'll be in position before you arrive. Agent Kellner handed me a small earpiece, nearly invisible when properly positioned. This will allow you to hear us if we need to provide urgent guidance. Gabriel won't be able to detect it. As I fitted the device, I thought about the irony of the situation. For years, Gabriel had been my guide, my advisor, the voice I trusted above all others. Now Interpol agents were literally the voices in my ear, helping me navigate the most dangerous conversation of my life. Remember, Morrison said, Gabriel will try to control the narrative from the moment you see him. He'll have rehearsed emotional appeals, prepared evidence of his supposed government work, maybe even fabricated documents that seem to support his story. I nodded, checking my watch. Sunrise was in 30 minutes. The drive to Ajos Minas would take 15 minutes, giving me time to observe the location before Gabriel expected me to arrive. Mrs. Arlington, Morrison continued. If at any point you feel the situation is becoming dangerous, use the emergency signal. Don't try to be heroic. Gabriel Cook is a professional criminal who's killed before. I understand, I replied, though part of me wondered if I truly did. How could anyone understand what it felt like to prepare to betray someone you'd loved for 5 years, even knowing that person had planned to destroy you? Agent Kellner was monitoring Gabriel's location. He's reached the church area, taking position near the old lighthouse, exactly where we predicted. I walked to the terrace one final time, looking out at the Mediterranean dawn. Somewhere across that peaceful water, Victor Petrov waited on his yacht with millions of dollars, expecting to purchase stolen artifacts authenticated by the famous Alexandra Arlington. Instead, he was about to witness the end of Gabriel Cook's criminal empire. It's time, Morrison said gently. I picked up my purse, checked that both devices were secure, and walked toward the door. As I passed the table where Gabriel's stolen diamonds still lay scattered like fallen stars, I felt a moment of profound clarity. Gabriel had spent 5 years teaching me to be the perfect mark. Now I was going to show him what the perfect trap looked like. The drive to Ajos Minas felt both endless and too short. With every mile I was leaving behind the last remnants of the woman Gabriel had shaped me to be, and moving toward a confrontation that would determine not just his fate, but the person I would become after this was over. Morrison's voice crackled through my earpiece as I navigated the winding coastal road. Target is in position near the lighthouse. 2 additional heat signatures detected in the area. Gabriel has backup. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Gabriel had brought associates to what was supposed to be an intimate reunion between husband and wife. Even his emotional appeals came with tactical support. Mrs. Arlington, Agent Kellner's voice joined the transmission. We've identified one of Gabriel's associates, Jack Remmer, suspected art smuggler, with connections to European black market networks. He's positioned approximately 50 meters northeast of the church. Remmer, the same surname as my former colleague Emily Thatcher, though Kellner had mentioned Emily Remmer as the gallery owner Gabriel had possibly murdered. A chill ran through me as I realized Gabriel might have brought the person who'd killed someone trying to expose him. The church of Agios Minas came into view as I crested the final hill. It was smaller than I'd remembered from our scouting trip, a simple white structure perched on cliffs overlooking the sea. The old lighthouse stood sentinel nearby, its weathered stone surface catching the early morning light. I could see Gabriel's silhouette near the lighthouse, exactly where he'd positioned himself for maximum visibility and multiple escape routes. Even from a distance, his posture looked controlled, confident. He thought he was orchestrating another successful manipulation. "Remember," Morrison's voice whispered in my ear, "Gabriel will have prepared extensively for this conversation. Every word, every gesture, every document he shows you has been calculated for maximum emotional impact." I parked where Gabriel could see me approaching, just as a confused, desperate wife would do. As I walked toward the church, I forced my shoulders to slump slightly, my steps to seem hesitant. Gabriel was an expert at reading body language. I needed to project vulnerability while remaining alert for threats. "Alexandra," Gabriel's voice carried across the morning air as I approached. He stepped out from behind the lighthouse, arms outstretched, the picture of a relieved husband reuniting with his beloved wife. He looked exactly as he always had, handsome, well-dressed, radiating that confident charm that had first attracted me 5 years ago. But now I could see the calculation behind his warm smile, the way his eyes were constantly scanning for threats, the careful positioning that kept escape routes clear. "Gabriel," I said, letting my voice break slightly as I moved toward him. "I was so scared. Those agents, they said such terrible things about you." He embraced me, and for a moment muscle memory almost made me relax into his familiar warmth. But I forced myself to remain alert, aware that Gabriel's arms around me could just as easily become restraints if he suspected betrayal. "I know, darling," he murmured against my hair. "I know how frightening this must be. But I'm going to explain everything, and then we can put this nightmare behind us." Over Gabriel's shoulder, I caught a glimpse of movement near the rocks below the church. Jack Remmer, positioning himself with a clear view of our meeting. Morrison's voice confirmed what I'd seen. Second associate confirmed. "We have both targets in sight." Gabriel pulled back to look at my face, his hands framing my cheeks in a gesture that had once felt protective, but now seemed controlling. "Alexandra, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" I nodded, letting tears gather in my eyes. "I want to trust you, Gabriel, but those agents had evidence. Documents, photographs. They said you're not who you claim to be." Gabriel's expression shifted to practiced concern mixed with wounded pride. "Those documents were fabricated, darling. Part of a very sophisticated operation designed to destroy everything we've built together." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather portfolio. "But I have proof. Real proof of who I actually am and why those men are trying to destroy me." As Gabriel opened the portfolio, Morrison's voice whispered urgently in my ear, "Whatever he shows you, remember it's likely forged. Gabriel is skilled at document fabrication." Gabriel handed me an official-looking credential with his photograph and the seal of what appeared to be a government intelligence agency. The craftsmanship was exceptional. If I hadn't known it was fake, I might have been convinced. "For the past 8 years," Gabriel said, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing classified information, "I've been working undercover to infiltrate international art theft networks. Everything about Gabriel Thatcher is a cover identity designed to get close to criminals who traffic in stolen cultural artifacts." I stared at the forged credentials, letting my expression show confusion and desperate hope. "This says you work for the CIA." "Not CIA," Gabriel corrected gently. a joint task force between American and European intelligence services. My mission has been to identify and bring down the people who steal priceless artwork from museums and private collections. The audacity was breathtaking. Gabriel was claiming to be hunting the very criminals he actually was. As Gabriel continued his elaborate deception, weaving lies so complex they almost seemed believable, I realized I was witnessing a master manipulator's final performance. But what he didn't know was that I was finally ready to give a performance of my own. Gabriel pulled out additional documents from his portfolio: mission briefings, surveillance photos, what appeared to be operational orders with classified stamps. The level of detail was staggering, and I could see how any reasonable person would be convinced by such comprehensive fabrication. "Alexandra," Gabriel said, his voice heavy with fabricated emotion, "the reason I married you wasn't just for cover. Yes, your expertise in art authentication made you valuable to the operation, but I fell in love with you despite my professional obligations." I studied the forged documents, letting my expression shift from confusion to cautious hope. "These photos, they show you with the same people those Interpol agents said you worked with, because I was infiltrating their organization," Gabriel explained smoothly. "Every photograph they showed you was documentation of my undercover work. The women you saw me with were either assets providing intelligence or targets I was investigating." Morrison's voice whispered in my ear, "Keep him talking. We need him to reveal more about his actual network." I looked up from the documents, allowing tears to flow freely. "Gabriel, if this is true, why didn't you tell me? Why keep me in the dark for 5 years?" Gabriel's expression became pained, perfectly calibrated for maximum emotional impact. "Because knowledge would have put you in danger. The people I've been hunting are ruthless, Alexandra. They kill anyone who threatens their operations. I've been protecting you by keeping you uninformed." "But the diamonds in your suitcase, evidence I was transporting to my handlers," Gabriel interrupted. "Stolen goods I'd recovered during my infiltration of the network. I was supposed to deliver them yesterday, but when those fake Interpol agents appeared, I had to abort the mission." I pretended to consider this explanation, though internally I was analyzing Gabriel's psychological state. He was performing flawlessly, but I could detect subtle signs of stress, the barely perceptible tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flickering toward his escape routes. "Gabriel," I said carefully, "if you're really working for the government, why don't you just contact your handlers? They could clear this up with Interpol." For the first time Gabriel's composure cracked slightly. "It's complicated, darling. There are jurisdictional issues. My handlers can't officially acknowledge my existence without compromising other ongoing operations." Agent Kellner's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Viktor Petrov's yacht is moving closer to shore. We think Gabriel is preparing to complete his sail, regardless of this conversation." I realized with growing clarity that Gabriel wasn't just trying to convince me of his innocence. He was buying time for his criminal associates to complete their operation. This entire emotional reunion was tactical misdirection. "There's something else," Gabriel continued, reaching for another document. "The people trying to destroy me have threatened you specifically. They know that hurting you would be the most effective way to control me." He handed me what appeared to be a surveillance photograph of myself entering a coffee shop near our home. The image was recent, probably taken within the past month. "They've been watching you, Alexandra, learning your routines, your vulnerabilities. That's why I had to disappear, to draw their attention away from you." The photograph was real, I realized with a chill. Gabriel actually had been having me surveyed, but not by enemies, by his own criminal network. He was showing me evidence of his own stalking and framing it as protection. Morrison's urgent voice filled my ear. "Mrs. Arlington, we're detecting movement from multiple positions." Gabriel's people are preparing for something. We may need to move soon. I looked at Gabriel, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in our 5-year relationship. Every expression, every gesture, every word was calculated manipulation. But now I could see the cracks in his performance, the desperation beneath the confidence, the fear behind the charm. "Gabriel," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "there's something I need to tell you." Gabriel's expression shifted to concern. "What is it, darling?" I took a deep breath, knowing that my next words would determine whether I lived or died. "Those Interpol agents you think are fake? They're still at our villa. They've been listening to every word of this conversation." Gabriel's face went completely blank for a moment, his mask finally slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. Then his hand moved toward his jacket, and I knew I was about to see the real Gabriel Cook for the first time. The man who would kill to protect his secrets. In that moment of terrible clarity, as Gabriel's hand moved toward what I now realized was a weapon, I understood that all the psychological preparation in the world couldn't have prepared me for the simple, stark reality. I was face to face with a man who had been planning my death for months. "Alexandra," Gabriel said, his voice completely different now, cold, calculating, stripped of all pretense of affection. That was a very foolish thing to say. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The loving husband, the wounded innocent, the undercover agent, all of those personas evaporated, leaving behind something predatory and utterly without conscience. My hand moved instinctively toward the emergency beacon in my phone case, but Gabriel was faster. His hand closed around my wrist with surprising strength. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said quietly. "Jack has a rifle trained on us from the rocks. One signal from me, and this becomes a very different conversation." Morrison's voice crackled urgently in my earpiece. "We see the weapon. Stay calm, Mrs. Arlington. We're moving into position." Gabriel's eyes narrowed as he studied my face. "You're wearing surveillance equipment, aren't you?" "Of course you are. Alexandra, you've become much more resourceful than I gave you credit for." Despite the terror flooding through me, I felt a strange surge of pride. For 5 years, Gabriel had seen me as a predictable asset. Now finally, I had surprised him. "Gabriel," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, "it's over. Interpol knows everything. About the stolen artifacts, about Viktor Petrov, about your entire operation." Gabriel's grip on my wrist tightened. "Perhaps, but they don't know about the alternative plan." "What alternative plan?" Gabriel smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I'd ever seen. "The one where you discovered evidence of your husband's criminal activities and confronted him in a remote location. Where you tragically fell from these cliffs during the struggle, leaving behind only your recording device with evidence of my crimes." The cold calculation in his voice made my blood freeze. Gabriel had planned for this contingency. Even facing capture, he was thinking strategically about how to eliminate the threat I represented while creating a believable cover story. "They'll never believe that," I said, though uncertainty crept into my voice. "Won't they?" Gabriel asked conversationally. Devastated wife discovers husband's betrayal, confronts him in isolated location, tragic accident ensues. It's quite believable, actually, especially with the right physical evidence. Agent Kellner's voice filled my earpiece. "Teams in position." "On your signal, Mrs. Arlington." But Gabriel had positioned himself perfectly. He was using my body as a shield against sniper fire, while keeping himself close enough to the cliff edge that he could push me over if Interpol agents moved too quickly. "Gabriel," I said, playing for time, "the artifacts you stole. Where are they now?" Gabriel's expression shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of professional pride breaking through his murderous focus. "Clever girl, trying to extract intelligence for your handlers." He gestured toward the sea, where Viktor Petrov's yacht was now clearly visible approaching the shore. "They're already aboard Mr. Petrov's vessel, authenticated yesterday by your predecessor, Emily Remmer, before her unfortunate accident in London." My blood chilled. Gabriel was confirming that he'd murdered Emily, the gallery owner who'd tried to expose him, and he was planning the same fate for me. "The authentication documents bear your signature, of course," Gabriel continued casually. "Amazing what modern technology can accomplish with document forgery. Your reputation will posthumously validate some very expensive stolen goods." Morrison's voice was urgent in my ear. "Mrs. Arlington, we need a clear signal. Can you create separation between yourself and Gabriel?" But Gabriel's hand remained locked around my wrist, and I could see the cold determination in his eyes. He'd killed before to protect his operations, and he wouldn't hesitate to kill again. "Gabriel," I said, making one final attempt to reach whatever humanity might remain in him. 5 years. Did any of it mean anything to you? For just a moment, Gabriel's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You were never supposed to matter, Alexandra. That was my mistake, allowing you to become real to me. It made this unnecessarily complicated." His grip on my wrist relaxed slightly, and I realized this might be my only chance. "But complications," Gabriel continued, "can always be eliminated." His other hand moved toward his jacket again, and I knew I had seconds to act. I activated the emergency beacon and threw myself sideways toward the church wall, screaming, "Now! Take him now!" What happened next unfolded in a chaos of gunfire, shouting agents, and the sudden appearance of Gabriel's true nature unleashed. But in that moment of pure survival instinct, I discovered something about myself that 5 years of manipulation hadn't been able to destroy. The crack of sniper fire split the morning air as I rolled behind the church wall. Gabriel dove in the opposite direction, his weapon finally clearing his jacket, a compact pistol that looked both deadly and professional. The charming husband who'd brought me coffee in bed was gone forever, replaced by the international criminal he'd always been. "Jack's down," Morrison's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Suspect neutralized on the cliff face." Gabriel's backup had been eliminated, but Gabriel himself was still armed and cornered, which made him infinitely more dangerous. Through a gap in the stone wall, I could see him pressed against the lighthouse, calculating escape routes with the cold efficiency of a professional killer. "Alexandra," Gabriel called out, his voice carrying that false warmth again. "This doesn't have to end badly for you. Walk away now, and I'll let you live." Agent Kellner's voice whispered in my ear, "Keep him talking. Teams are moving into final positions." But I realized something that surprised me. I didn't want to hide behind the wall anymore. For 5 years, Gabriel had made me doubt myself, second-guess my instincts, defer to his judgment in all things. He'd systematically destroyed my confidence while building his criminal empire around my expertise. I stood up and stepped out from behind the church wall. "Gabriel," I called back, my voice steady and clear, "I'm not walking away. Not this time." Gabriel's expression shifted to confusion, then concern. For the first time in our entire relationship, I was doing something he hadn't predicted. "Alexandra, get back behind cover," he said, genuine worry creeping into his voice. "The agents will use you to get to me." "No," I said, walking slowly toward him across the open ground between the church and lighthouse. "They won't, because I'm not a victim anymore, Gabriel. I'm a witness." Morrison's urgent voice filled my earpiece. "Mrs. Arlington, get back to cover immediately. Gabriel is armed and desperate." But I kept walking, watching Gabriel's face as understanding dawned. For 5 years he'd seen me as a controllable asset. Now he was seeing something he'd never encountered before. A woman who'd learned to see through his manipulation, and wasn't afraid of him anymore. "You're making a mistake," Gabriel said, raising his weapon. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you force me to. No, you won't, I replied, stopping just 10 feet away from him, because killing me now, with Interpol watching, would destroy your only remaining escape strategy. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. What escape strategy? I smiled, feeling the strength of my own intelligence for the first time in years. The one where you convinced them you were trying to protect me from your criminal associates. Where the devoted husband sacrificed everything to save his innocent wife from dangerous criminals who'd been manipulating him. Gabriel stared at me, his weapon wavering slightly. I could see him processing this new scenario, calculating whether it could work. But that strategy only works, I continued, if I corroborate your story. If I tell them you're the victim here, not the mastermind. And why would you do that? Gabriel asked, though hope was creeping into his voice. Because despite everything you've done, part of me still loves the man I thought you were, I said, letting genuine emotion bleed into my voice. The question is, what are you willing to give me in return? Gabriel lowered his weapon slightly. What do you want? The truth, I said simply. All of it. The real locations of the stolen artifacts. The identities of your criminal network. Evidence that could save the other women you've destroyed. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, clearly torn between hope and suspicion. And if I give you that information, then I'll tell Interpol that Gabriel Cook was a cover identity forced on you by criminals who threatened your family. That you were trying to escape their organization when they framed you. It was a lie, of course. But it was the kind of lie Gabriel wanted to believe, one where he was still the hero of his own story. Gabriel's weapon dropped to his side. Alexandra, Gabriel Cook. Morrison's voice boomed across the cliff top through a megaphone. Drop your weapon and surrender immediately. Gabriel looked at me, then at the Interpol agents emerging from their positions around the lighthouse. For a moment I thought he might actually surrender. Instead he smiled, that charming confident smile that had fooled me for 5 years. I'm sorry, Alexandra, he said quietly. But I was never the man you thought I was. And then Gabriel Cook did what he'd always done when cornered. He ran. As Gabriel sprinted toward the cliff edge, where a speedboat waited in the cove below, I realized that some people can never be saved from themselves. But watching him flee, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that I was finally free. Gabriel reached the cliff edge, and paused for just a moment, looking back at me, across the distance between the lighthouse and where I stood. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the conflict in his posture, the professional criminal warring with whatever genuine feelings he might have developed over 5 years. Alexandra, he called out one final time. I never meant for it to happen this way. Morrison and his team were closing in from 3 directions, but Gabriel had planned his escape route well. The speedboat below was already moving into position, its engines creating white foam against the dark rocks. Goodbye, Gabriel, I called back, and meant it in every possible sense. Gabriel hesitated for another heartbeat, then rappelled down the cliff face with the practiced ease of someone who'd made many similar escapes. Within moments, he was aboard the speedboat, which roared away from the coast at incredible speed. Morrison reached my side, as the boat disappeared around the headland. Greek Coast Guard and naval units are in pursuit, he said, speaking into his radio. But Gabriel planned this well. He might actually escape. I watched the speedboat's wake fade on the horizon, and realized something surprising. I hoped he would escape. Not because I wanted him to continue his criminal activities, but because I wanted to know that somewhere in the world, Gabriel Cook was living with the consequences of his choices rather than hiding from them in prison. Mrs. Arlington, Agent Kellner approached with Viktor Petrov in handcuffs. The Russian art buyer looked nothing like the sophisticated collector I'd imagined, just an older man in expensive clothes who'd been caught purchasing stolen goods. Mr. Petrov has agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation. He's provided the locations of the stolen Minoan artifacts. I nodded, feeling strangely detached from the victory. We'd broken up Gabriel's operation, recovered millions of dollars in stolen art, and prevented future crimes. But the man I'd loved for 5 years was gone forever, not dead, but revealed to be someone who'd never really existed. 6 months later, I stood in my new art authentication laboratory in Florence, Italy. The space was bright, modern, filled with the equipment I'd always dreamed of having for my consulting business. My clients included major museums, private collectors, and law enforcement agencies seeking expertise in identifying stolen or forged artworks. The irony wasn't lost on me that Gabriel's attempts to exploit my professional knowledge had ultimately led to me building the career I'd always wanted. Cleo called me every week now. We'd rebuilt our friendship slowly, carefully, with both of us acknowledging the years that had been lost to Gabriel's manipulation. My father and I had long conversations about trust, judgment, and the difference between loving someone and enabling their destruction of your life. Marcus, our family's security chief, had indeed suspected Gabriel from the beginning. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been quietly documenting Gabriel's suspicious behaviors for years, building a file he'd planned to present to my father when he had enough evidence. Gabriel's paranoia about Marcus had been entirely justified. The stolen Minoan artifacts were returned to their rightful owners. Viktor Petrov served 18 months in prison and paid substantial fines. Gabriel's criminal network was systematically dismantled by Interpol, though several key figures escaped capture. Gabriel himself was never found. Sometimes I wondered if he'd reinvented himself again, assumed a new identity, perhaps even found another woman to target. The thought should have disturbed me, but instead it felt like closure. Gabriel Cook would always be running, always looking over his shoulder, always building relationships on foundations of lies. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something real. My new apartment overlooked the Arno River, with views of the Ponte Vecchio that changed with the light throughout the day. I painted watercolors in the evenings, something I hadn't done since college, before Gabriel convinced me that my artistic attempts were amateur and embarrassing. I dated occasionally, but carefully. The experience with Gabriel had taught me to trust my instincts about people, to pay attention to inconsistencies, to value friends who questioned my romantic choices rather than dismissing their concerns. On the anniversary of that morning in Santorini, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small watercolor painting of the Church of Agios Minas, painted from the perspective of someone standing near the lighthouse. The technique was amateur but enthusiastic, and something about the brushwork reminded me of the art classes Gabriel had mentioned taking in college. There was no note, no signature, nothing to definitively identify the sender, but I hung the painting in my kitchen anyway, not as a reminder of Gabriel, but as a reminder of the morning I'd chosen to stop being afraid. The woman who'd fled from that clifftop in terror had died that day in Santorini. The woman who'd taken her place was someone I was still getting to know, but someone I respected immensely. Alexandra Arlington was finally living her own life, making her own choices, trusting her own judgment. And it was more beautiful than any lie Gabriel Cook had ever told her.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.